Imagine watching a horrific news clip, then realizing the story you've been told for days, even by official sources, doesn't add up. A new theory has surfaced, and it doesn't just raise questions. It changes everything. Charlie Kirk, they told us, were shot from the front, but a new theory tells a different story. A shot from behind, multiple angles, and even the shadow of a hidden shooter. Today, we're uncovering everything. And when you see what's uncovered, you'll understand why people are calling this one of the most explosive conspiracies in recent memory. Now, before we dive deep into this analysis, I need to give credit where credit is due. This theory and the forensic breakdown we're about to discuss was meticulously analyzed by Range Day Bro, a gentleman who took the time to examine this evidence frame by frame with a friend and is working to spread this crucial information. If you want to see the actual video analysis we'll be discussing, I highly recommend checking out his video. I'll leave the link at the top of the description so you can check it out after this breakdown. He deserves all the credit for this groundbreaking work, and it needs to be spread with the world. In this video, I will simply share my insights and my opinion based on what he has discovered and what we know so far. For those who might need a refresher, let me walk you through what we were told happened. The FBI and government agencies painted a very specific picture. Charlie Kirk was allegedly shot from the front during what appeared to be a public event. They arrested someone named Tyler Robinson, positioned him as the lone gunman, and within hours, the narrative was set in stone. The media ran with it. The case seemed closed, assuming justice was being served. But here's where it gets concerning. That official story spread faster than wildfire through every major news outlet. Within days, we had a complete narrative package. The shooter, the motive, the method, the location, everything tied up in a neat little bow. Now, having spent some time in industries where information moves fast, I can tell you that when a complex story gets packaged that quickly, especially one involving a high-profile political figure, it usually means someone was ready with that story before the events even unfolded. Think about it for a moment. When has any major investigation, especially one involving a public assassination, been solved so definitively in such a short time frame? The Kennedy assassination is still being debated decades later. Yet somehow, this case was supposedly solved before Charlie Kirk's memorial happened. Now, yesterday, a video surfaced that didn't fit the official story. And when I say didn't fit, I mean it completely shattered the foundation of everything we've been told. This wasn't just some new grainy cell phone footage from a random bystander. This was a detailed analysis conducted by highly trained military personnel, people who understand ballistics, who've seen combat, who know the difference between entry and exit wounds because they've unfortunately witnessed both. One particular Marine, the friend of Range Day Bro, who'd been shot multiple times in combat, took it upon himself to frame by frame analyze the available footage. What he found was nothing short of explosive. The key detail that changes everything. The entry wound appears to be in the back of Charlie Kirk's head with the exit wound in his throat. Let me repeat that because it's crucial: entry in the back, exit in the front. If that's accurate and multiple experts are now debating this, then it means the story we were told can't be right. Now, I want to be very careful here because we're dealing with someone's family and the grief of real people. This isn't about sensationalism or conspiracy theories for entertainment. This is about truth. And truth matters because it affects all of us. When official narratives don't match physical evidence, we have to ask why. Let me walk you through what these forensic experts are seeing, and I'll try to explain it in terms that make sense without being too graphic. When you look at the video footage, and I want to warn you, this is disturbing content we're discussing. You can observe several things that experienced military personnel recognize immediately. First, there's a blood pattern. According to the analysis, you can see what appears to be blood splatter coming from the back of Kirk's head, not the front. This matters because blood spatter tells a story about direction and impact. If someone is shot from the front, the blood pattern looks different than if they're shot from behind. It's basic physics, really. The force pushes material in the direction it's traveling. Second, there's what's called the head snap. This is exactly what it sounds like, the way someone's head moves when impacted by a bullet. According to the experts analyzing this footage, Kirk's head movement is consistent with being struck from behind, not from the front. The head jerks forward, which is what you'd expect from a rear impact. Third, and this is perhaps the most telling detail, there's something called a spinal reaction. When someone suffers a spinal injury, particularly to the upper spine or neck area, there's a very specific way the body responds. The person tenses up in a particular manner, and then there's often a collapse. Multiple veterans who've seen combat injuries are saying Kirk's physical response in the video matches this type of spinal trauma, which would be consistent with a shot from behind traveling downward through the neck area. Now, once you accept that possibility, a cascade of new questions emerges, doesn't it? If Charlie Kirk was shot from behind, then where was the shooter positioned? The official story places Tyler Robinson in a completely different location, a position that wouldn't allow for a rear shot. So either the forensic analysis is wrong, which multiple independent experts are now saying it isn't, or we're dealing with something much more complex than a lone gunman scenario. And that's where things get really scary. Hours of photographic analysis by investigators, not government investigators, but independent researchers, have uncovered something remarkable. In the background of several photos taken at the scene, there appears to be a figure concealed in nearby vegetation. At first glance, it looks like just bushes or landscaping. But when you examine it closely, enhance the image, and look at the color tones and shapes, a very different picture emerges. This blurred figure shows what appears to be human skin tone in an area where you'd expect to see someone's face. There's a shape that's remarkably consistent with a rifle, specifically what looks like the cross pattern of an AR-15 with an optic mounted on it. And perhaps most importantly, the positioning of this figure aligns perfectly with the trajectory that would create the wound pattern the forensic experts are describing. Think about this for a moment. We're not talking about wild speculation here. We're talking about multiple independent analyses conducted by people with military training, all pointing to the same conclusion. Charlie Kirk was likely shot from behind by someone positioned in concealment, not from the front by Tyler. Now, if a shooter was concealed nearby, then who was the man they arrested? And why was his arrest and prosecution moved forward so quickly when the physical evidence apparently doesn't support the government's version of events? This brings us to Tyler Robinson himself and the problems with the official case. The government's entire prosecution rests on the idea that Robinson was positioned in a specific location with a clear line of sight to Kirk and that he fired the fatal shot from that position. But if the forensic evidence shows the shot came from behind from a completely different angle, then Robinson couldn't have been the shooter, at least not the only shooter. Let's think about this logically. Robinson was supposedly on a rooftop or elevated position in front of Kirk. The ballistics and wound patterns suggest a shooter positioned behind and to the side of Kirk. These are two completely different scenarios. They can't both be true simultaneously. Moreover, and this is something that should concern every American regardless of political affiliation, there are serious questions about the evidence being used to prosecute Robinson. Some investigators are suggesting that key pieces of evidence, particularly text messages that supposedly show Robinson planning the attack, might have been fabricated or recreated after the fact. Now, I can't prove that, and I want to be clear about what we know versus what we're speculating about. But when you have forensic evidence that contradicts the prosecution's theory and questions about the authenticity of supporting evidence, you have to wonder if we're watching a miscarriage of justice unfold. And if Tyler Robinson wasn't the shooter, then maybe he was something else entirely. Maybe he was exactly what some investigators are now suggesting, a sci guy, someone who was supposed to take the blame while the real perpetrators escape justice. This is where the theory shifts from simple tragedy to coordinated conspiracy. And I know that word conspiracy makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but sometimes conspiracies are real. Sometimes powerful people do coordinate to achieve specific outcomes, even when those outcomes involve tragic loss of life. The evidence suggests we might be dealing with multiple distractions and diversions. There were people in the crowd claiming to have been the shooter. There were figures spotted on rooftops. There was immediate chaos and confusion that made it difficult for witnesses to track what was really happening. This isn't accidental. This is the hallmark of a sophisticated operation designed to confuse witnesses and protect the actual perpetrator. When you have multiple decoys, multiple distractions, and a prepackaged narrative ready to go within hours, you're not looking at a lone wolf attack. You're looking at something that was planned, coordinated, and executed by people with resources and expertise. But here's where it gets even more complex and where we need to start asking the bigger questions. This isn't just about who killed Charlie Kirk, as important as that question island. This is about who benefits from his death, and more importantly, who benefits from the way American society has reacted to his death. I've seen a lot of theories floating around about foreign governments, about specific international actors who might have wanted Kirk silenced because of his political positions. Some of these theories might have merit, but I think they miss the bigger picture. The real question isn't which foreign power orchestrated this. It's which domestic power structures benefit from the chaos and division that Kirk's death has created. And that leads us to the uncomfortable thought. What if this wasn't about Kirk at all? What if he was simply a symbolic target chosen not because of who he was but because of what his death would accomplish? To understand this possibility, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger forces at play in American society right now. We need to talk about something that most mainstream media outlets won't touch. The systematic effort by global elites to reshape American society, to weaken our institutions, and to divide us against each other so thoroughly that we become easier to control. You see, There are people in this world, and I'm talking about individuals with more wealth and power than most small countries, who see America's traditional independence and strength as obstacles to their vision of global governance. They've made no secret of their goals. They talk openly about reshaping the world economy, about reducing American influence, about creating what they call a new world order where national sovereignty takes a backseat to global management. For these people, someone like Charlie Kirk represented exactly the kind of voice they needed to silence. Not because of any specific policy position, but because he was effective at rallying Americans around traditional values of independence, skepticism of authority, and resistance to global governance schemes. But here's the sinister part of it. Kirk's death hasn't just silenced one voice. It's divided the entire American population into warring camps. On one side, you have people celebrating his death, openly expressing joy that someone they disagreed with politically has been killed. On the other side, you have people so enraged by this celebration that they're talking about retribution, about taking matters into their own hands. This division, this hatred, this breakdown of basic human decency, that's not an accidental byproduct of Kirk's death. That might be the entire point. Think about it this way. If you wanted to push America toward civil conflict, toward the breakdown of our democratic institutions, what would be more effective than a political assassination that splits the country down the middle? You'd have one side cheering for political violence, normalizing the idea that it's acceptable to kill people you disagree with. And you'd have the other side so outraged by that response that they start talking about fighting back with equal violence. This isn't speculation, friends. We're watching it happen in real time. Social media platforms are filled with people on the left openly celebrating Kirk's death, making jokes about it, creating memes. At the same time, people on the right are becoming increasingly radicalized, talking about retaliation, about taking justice into their own hands if the system won't do it for them. This is exactly the kind of social fracturing that leads to civil unrest. And civil unrest is exactly what certain powerful interests need to justify the implementation of more authoritarian control measures. It's a classic problem-reaction-solution scenario. Create the problem, wait for the predictable reaction, then offer the solution that gives you more power. You see, we're living through what some analysts are calling Project 2030, a coordinated effort to fundamentally reshape not just America, but the entire global economic and political system. Now, I know that sounds like conspiracy theory territory, but these aren't secret plans. The people behind these initiatives talk about them openly. They publish papers. They hold conferences. They make speeches about their vision for the future. Their vision includes something they call "you'll own nothing and be happy about it." It includes the idea that national governments should take a backseat to global governance structures. It includes the belief that individual liberty needs to be curtailed in favor of collective management by experts and technocrats. For these plans to work, they need America to be weakened, divided, and ultimately broken. A strong unified America with citizens who value independence and constitutional rights is the biggest obstacle to their vision of global control. So they need us fighting each other instead of recognizing who the real threat island. And that's exactly what's happening. Instead of Americans coming together to demand the truth about what happened to Charlie Kirk, we're at each other's throats. Instead of questioning why our government agencies seem to have such a questionable track record when it comes to high-profile investigations, we're arguing about whether Kirk deserved to die. But here's what really concerns me about where this is all heading. Civil unrest doesn't happen accidentally. It requires a trigger. A catalyst that pushes people beyond their normal boundaries of acceptable behavior. And I'm worried that Kirk's assassination combined with the celebratory reaction from some segments of society might be that trigger. You have to understand actual civil conflict, not protests, not political disagreements, but real civil war doesn't come from the left in this country. It comes from people like us, from conservatives, from people who still believe in traditional American values. The left might be the agitators. They might be the ones celebrating political violence and pushing boundaries, but they're not the ones with the capability to actually tear the country apart through organized violence. That capability rests with people who understand firearms, who have military or law enforcement training, who live in rural areas with strong community bonds. In other words, it rests with exactly the demographic that's most outraged by Kirk's death and most disgusted by the celebration of that death. And I think that's intentional. I think the goal is to push patriotic Americans to the point where they feel they have no choice but to take up arms to defend their country and their values. Because once that happens, once shooting starts, the same people who orchestrated this whole scenario will step in as the adults in the room to restore order through authoritarian measures that would never be acceptable under normal circumstances. It's a trap, folks. A very sophisticated, very dangerous trap. And the only way to avoid it is to recognize it for what it is and refuse to take the bait. Now, I want to be absolutely clear about something. I will never support or promote political violence of any kind. The moment we start believing that our fellow Americans deserve to die because of their political beliefs, we've lost everything that makes America worth defending. And I don't care how angry you are, how disgusted you are by the reaction to Kirk's death, or how convinced you are that the system is rigged against us. Violence against other Americans is never the answer. You know why? Because the people who really run things, the ones pulling the strings behind these events, they're counting on us to choose violence. They need us to destroy ourselves so they don't have to do it directly. Every time we turn on each other, instead of holding them accountable, we're doing their work for them. But amidst all this anger, all this manipulation, all this orchestrated chaos, there's been one voice that stands out as a beacon of what America could be if we chose a different path. And that's the voice of Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow. I want you to imagine for a moment what it would feel like to lose your spouse to political violence. Imagine the grief, the rage, the desire for revenge that would consume most people in that situation. Now imagine having to process those emotions while half the country celebrates your loss, makes jokes about your husband's death, and treats his killing like some kind of victory for their political side. Most of us would be consumed by hatred. Most of us would want blood. Most of us would use our platform, our moment in the spotlight to call for retribution against our political enemies. But that's not what Erica Kirk did. Instead, she stood up in front of the world and said something that should shame every American who's been celebrating her husband's death. I forgive Charlie's killer. Think about the strength that took. Think about the conscious choice to rise above the hatred, to refuse to let her grief be weaponized for political purposes, to demonstrate the kind of grace and dignity that used to be considered essentially American. When I watched that moment, I saw something that gave me hope for this country's future. Not because forgiveness solves everything, but because it demonstrates that we don't have to let our emotions be manipulated by people with ulterior motives. We can choose to respond with wisdom instead of rage, with love instead of hatred, with unity instead of division. But even as Erica Kirk was demonstrating this incredible example of human decency, there were people online mocking her, making disgusting jokes about her situation, treating her moment of grace as an opportunity for more cruelty.